how many of you are entrepreneurs who are doing their startups currently among the crowd? All right, let's give a big round of applause to all these aspiring dreamers. Awesome. So now, how do you create a cloud defense leader, and within 3 years from your founding time, and you get it acquired by the global cybersecurity leader in the industry? Are you interested in hearing that story today? Yeah. Oh, come on. Yeah. Okay. All right. This is what Varun did with his team at Redlock. Not only did he get his company acquired by Palo Alto Networks for $173 million in 3 years. So you just get excited to ask all the questions he'll have time later on to answer, okay? And by not only that, Palo Alto combined Redlock technologies to provide their customers with cloud security analytics and advanced threat detection, as well as continuous security and monitoring compliance in a single offering, so that they could help all the security teams. A lot of you who are in security know there's a big issue of, number one, the talent, and also there are a lot of tools. So they use the technology and they are made it part of the cloud, which Varun right now is the senior VP of products for that division. Before Palo Alto Networks, Varun was also the founding member of another high-profile company, CASB company called Cypher Cloud, and some of you might know of that company also. And then earlier, he was leading the security team of Force.com. How many of you are familiar with Force.com platform? All right, at Salesforce. And he began his career after getting his degree in computer science from USC at KPMG, and later on we'll have his first manager also say a few words in the Q&A. I don't know what he's going to say, so Varun. So with that, I'm not going to take too much of thrill out of Varun's story, and I would like to invite him to share his amazing, colorful, and exciting entrepreneurial journey. So let's give him a big, big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. It's great to be here. First of all, I appreciate you all being here, especially overwhelmingly Indian population. I hear it's Dashera tonight, so happy Dashera to all of you. Again, really appreciate you folks being here. I hope to keep this interactive. I'm trying to do this a little differently. I have no words on my slides, I just have pictures. And I'm going to try to tell a story through pictures that sort of articulate a little bit of my journey from childhood to transition to US, to starting a company, selling a company. And we'll see if it works. It's my first time doing this. Just didn't want to bore you with 6 bullet points on a slide. All right. So a little bit about my background. Born and raised into an army family in India, and raised in a small town called Dehradun. Went to a boarding school called Doon School, for some of you that might be familiar with that. And, sort of was what I'd consider a hustler, or at least my parents would consider a hustler even at a growing age, in a hopefully positive way. So when I was like 8 years old, my parents would have lots of parties and guests over. I would be the guy serving food and appetizers and all. At the end of the night, I would give my parents a bill and say, hey, this is service charge for tonight. Growing up, as you would imagine in any Indian sort of, a household, you're sort of almost forced to believe that a technical degree is something, either a doctor, engineer, or something is really what you need. Otherwise, you're sort of not whole, if you will. And so, moved to the U.S. and sort of came to USC. And let me see if I can move these things along here. Sorry. Moved to USC. Sort of my head told me I have to do something technical. Computer science was the closest. I was a complete failure in bio, so medical school was not an option. So, by default, computer science is what, sort of call it the fallback technical option that I started moving into. But my heart was always into the business side. And this became sort of an interesting dilemma when you're in year 3, you're starting to think about, career fairs, and you're going and, you don't quite understand, am I going for a software engineering job that I absolutely hate? I don't want to do it. Apologies for those of you that are software engineers. High degree of respect for all of you. I just couldn't do it. And so, by sheer sort of accident, force of nature, whatever you might call it, I convinced or coerced my advisor for my undergraduate program to allow me to take this elective course in lieu of a programming class. And this was an elective in ethical hacking. And my God, that changed my career. That elective, it was the most exciting thing I'd done. I could break into systems, I could break into networks, knowing that I wouldn't go to jail, right? And so that was just exciting. Unfortunately, the problem, though, was that back then, nobody would hire you out of college to go work in cybersecurity. Typically, to get into cybersecurity, you had to be in IT, you had to be more of a systems engineer, you needed a lot of experience. And so, being the hustler that I am, I decided that my best course of action was to interview around for the Big Four. And got 2 offers, one from Deloitte, one from KPMG. And I really sort of used that against them, if you will, to say, look, I really want to go do something in security, and what can you facilitate? And most were non-committal, but I'd say, I had a good salesman of a partner, Vijay knows well, and he convinced me to go join KPMG. And so that was sort of my first move out of college. And I'm honored that my first manager in my first professional job is sitting here, Vijay. And I must have been a pain in the ass for him for sure. I was a pain in the ass because, as you would imagine, at a Big Four, there's structure, there's experience required before they put you in front of clients, and I would always nag him to get me on some of the most interesting projects, challenging projects, high visibility projects, which he was very gracious to do. And I did that for about 14 months, and being the impatient self that I was, I said, you know what, consulting, I've got to be patient. I got to go to the partner track. It's 8-9 years. And, if I'm lucky and I do well, I'll make partner. I said, I'm not going to wait for that long. And so Salesforce was one of my clients that I was working on. And back in 2006, there were about 1,500 employees in the company. And they decided sort of this was, something that I could help them with. Brought me on board, and the next 4 years were incredible. Right, the company went from 1,500 employees to 6,000. Saw this just wonderful scale in the organization. But as sort of it happens to most of us, when you're in a job for 4 years, and especially when you're sort of I'm at the cusp of being a millennial, maybe not really. But one of the things that happens is you get an itch after 4 years, and I got the itch. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I felt like my learning curve was sort of flattening, if you will. And I'm sure a lot of you that think about doing a startup think about what else you want to do. You think about other jobs. Do you want to join a startup? Do you want to start a company? Do you want to go to business school? I know some people here who are thinking about it. And so I did that. I took my GMAT and got into Kellogg. Coincidentally, at the same time, I was sort of scratching my head saying, do I really want to do that? Do I want to go back into consulting, finance? What do I want to do after I get my degree? And, in my sort of professional capacity at Salesforce, I was interacting heavily with a company called Agilliance, which was another young startup. And I happened to be on the customer advisory board for the company. And in one of the customer advisory board meetings, the founder and CEO and myself started talking, and he wanted to do something in cloud security. I was in cloud security. I was probably very early in that space, before most people even started thinking about cloud security. And one thing led to the other, sort of led to the founding of, I said, you know what, we're going to go do a startup instead. And my wife's sitting in the room. At the time, we weren't quite married, but I said, look, I'm about to take a big risk. Hopefully it works out, but I wasn't married yet, so it was time for me to take a risk. Worked out just fine in hindsight. Thank you for supporting me. And Cypher Cloud was this phenomenal journey, and I'll tell you how lucky I am that that was my first jumping off point into startups. The reason for that is I wasn't the CEO. I had a CEO and a founder who had done 3 startups prior to that and understood the space, understood how to raise money, just a technological guru as you would think about it. And I was sort of with him starting this company. So there's a little bit of less pressure on me to go figure out how I'm going to do fundraising, how I'm going to go hire the first 5 people, where am I going to get the initial capital from. And so, he had a lot of success from his past life. We kicked things off, and we sort of just went out of the gates full guns blazing. As you can see here, very rare, we raised $30 million in our Series A itself. So, massive product market fit, excitement in the space, cloud security, one of the first companies doing cloud security, and things were looking better than they ever had. And I'll tell you, those 4.5 years were just such a phenomenal learning opportunity and experience. Learning with Praveen, who had done it before, but learning a few things. And I'll just give you a couple of takeaways from that. One, we always talk about product market fit as a startup. And in our minds, you're tuned to say, look, you got to get the first 10 or 20 customers. And if you get those, you're out of the gates. Good. Right now, think about scaling. And I will tell you the biggest learning from there was product market fit never ends. In a startup, in an emerging space, you have to keep going back and reassessing and reevaluating product market fit. Because markets change. You're in an early market. You're a trailblazer. What works today may not work tomorrow. The dynamics around you might change. You have to be careful. And I'd say one of the biggest learnings for me is that. The second learning is, and we'll come back to that later, but see the name of our first investor, Andreessen Horowitz. Incredible. Right? We all strive. Can we get the biggest brand investor initially? It's great. Puts a lot of pressure on you, though. Puts a lot of pressure on subsequent fundraising, expectations, and other things. So, not that it's bad. I think it's fantastic. Comes with a lot of value. But as I come to it later, there are things that are much more important than the brand. And the one thing I'll tell you that's most important is the person who's investing in you, not the brand, not the fund, not the fund side. Who is it who's going to be your partner in crime in building this company? And the third thing I'll tell you when you go through ups and downs is the one thing that's constant. Customers may come and go. Financiers might be there. It's your employees. And part of that, as I come back to the tail end of this, is sort of just the level of transparency. When things don't go well, we as humans have a tendency to hide some of the bad and focus on a lot of the good. Employees see through it. And I think part of this is just how much employees matter, because they're the one thing that's going to be constant around you. And we'll come back and tie that sort of story through. But phenomenal learning experience. Did that for about 4.5 years, and then decided I was ready to be a CEO, ready to be a founder. Cypher Cloud continues to this date to be successful. Praveen is running it. He's been a great mentor to me. But I felt like I was ready to go do something on my own, and that had been a great sort of learning experience for me. So that brings me to a day in September when I went to a complete coincidence. My co-founder now for Redlock, Gaurav, who used to work with me at Cypher Cloud, and I decided to meet for a coffee. He had left, I had left at Red Rock Cafe, not thinking twice. And I'll tell you, sort of as they say, when it's meant to be, it's meant to be. We spent 45 minutes, very easy conversation. We didn't know exactly what we wanted to do. We generally knew the space we wanted to work on. We generally knew the strengths and weaknesses of each other. We were very complementary to each other. There was very little overlap, and I'm not saying overlap is bad, but all he cared, he's a technical hacker at heart. He's an engineering guru, rock star. Those are the things that I told you in the beginning I care a little bit lesser about. And I'm more about the customer, this product, the scale, the go-to-market person, and he could care less about that. And it was good in some way because we trusted each other. We knew each other from the past. And 45 minutes later, we said, look, we'll just do a 50-50 split on equity. We're not going to start trying to fine-tune too much, because if we all end up being successful, fantastic. And, right before leaving, and I had a train to catch back to the city, he's like, well, what do we incorporate the company as? And, we just looked and we said, you know what, just make it Redlock. Like, anything with lock is security. And we're sitting here at Red Rock Cafe, so we'll worry about the name later. The funny thing is, it's stuck with us the whole time, and we never ended up sort of changing that name. Now, once you have a name in mind, you've incorporated the company, you have founders, well, the next thing you do is go to Sand Hill Road looking for money. Well, interesting thing in our case was, while we had backgrounds in cloud and security, and people sort of had an appreciation that we knew what we were talking about, we were still early. We didn't have a product. We didn't have any team besides us. We didn't have customers. The really funny thing about that number 24, anybody want to guess what that 24 is besides the exit number? Any guesses? No, it's the number of rejections we got. So our first 24 conversations with VCs were no's. By the way, we were fundraising at a very interesting time. This was September through December when we had 24 no's. The S&P was down 9.5%. 2015. So the summer, if you go look at the charts, summer onwards, the market started declining. A lot of late stage startups like Zenefits and others were sort of, people were writing down their investments. And so guess what? Investors are like, look, I've invested for the year. We'll think about it next year. And so a lot of them were closing their checkbooks, and it was hard. We were extremely frustrated. But one of the things I'll tell you, there's 3 P's that matter in a startup: patience, perseverance, and persistence. And the 2 P's that apply here are patience and persistence, right? And so we took this as a learning. Every conversation we had with the VCs, we sort of tweaked our message, we pushed ourselves. We just didn't take no from them to be a no, like this is not gonna work. And the 25th one was first week of January, we had a conversation with Sierra Ventures. And they were sort of, I think they believed more in us, that we could go do something, we could make something happen. And really the more important thing for us was we just felt that that partner was the right partner, that they would have patience in our in giving us time to go figure out what we were going to build. They would give us the capital, of course. And quite frankly, I would really recommend you spend time on this, is what is your style and expectation of your VC? It's not just about money. It's about governance. And how is that governance going to go ongoing? I had a perspective that I didn't want them to tell me how to run my company. I wanted them to provide guidance when I needed it. I wanted them to provide guardrails, but I did not want them to tell me how to structure my board meetings. I did not want them to tell me what templates to provide them results in. And the last thing I wanted to do is have my management team sit and build reports that made everything look good. So I needed somebody with empathy that understood, look, startups go through peaks and valleys, it'll be okay. And we just need to work through it. So I would really, as much as VCs are spending time to get to know you and understand if they want to invest in you, it is a two-way street. You have to do the same with them, right? Because you're going to spend more time with with them than your significant others at times. And the times are going to get tougher with them than they get at home. So the amount of time you spend finding your significant other, or if you're not, hopefully you will spend that amount of time, do the same with your investors. Okay. So, you've got capital, that's great. Sort of, how do you build this founding team? And a lot of people, this is an area that can really make it or break it. Idea is one thing. Capital is the other. The other third element of this is your founding team. And one of the most important things as a founder to recognize, as a CEO to recognize, is your strengths, but more importantly, your areas of weaknesses. It's important to be vulnerable. Vulnerable to yourself, vulnerable to people around you, and not try to be a be-it-all. It's one thing if you are, high ego personality running a big public company. Right now, remember, you're a nobody. Nobody cares about you. And part of this is how are you going to get people to come join you? They're going to come join you for you, not for your customers, not for anything else, right? And so part of this was really I leaned on people who had worked with me in the past, and I wanted to balance skill sets that were highly experienced in the domain, but then I wanted young blood. I wanted fresh people out of college that were hungry for success, that would learn fast, that would think differently. Because the folks that have done it over and over again are fantastic, but they will do it over and over again in the same cookie cutter manner. And somebody young, new, and restless, like me, 10 years, 12 years ago, back then, would want to do things a little bit differently, would want to have that hustle. And so the last piece I'll mention on this is let's not be stingy on equity. Like your first 10 people will make it or break it. And you can either have sort of 50% of nothing, or you can have 40% of a lot. And that's a choice you make early on with how you decide on a philosophy on the upside. I didn't offer any cash bonuses. I didn't want to put, more pressure on our cash flow, but I gave very generous equity. We've changed the lives of 85 people with the exit of Redlock, not the two founders, right? And so it's important that people have skin in the game. And a lot of times people are negotiating early. No, I'm not going to give you 0.5%. I'm going to give you 0.4. Guess what? That 0.1% means a lot more to them than it will to you on their cap table later. So think about that. All right, so you've got a founding team, you're building product. Well, people tell you, well, how are you going to sell this? Who are you going to sell this to? Right? And so you start thinking about the next segment of this, which is marketing. And so this is a picture of our first, the two founders going to our first event. This is when my wife told me my side parting looks great. Never listened to her again on the hairstyle at a conference. Anyway, this is us at AWS reInvent in 2016. And there was probably 600 companies, 400 companies. We were in the very back. Nobody came. The people who came wanted swag or a job. Nobody came, and you kind of learn, like, this isn't going to be easy. And this is one of those sort of valleys you go through. Just, gosh, I have a phenomenal product. Only if I could get it in front of people. How do I get in front of people? And for those of you who know security, there's 1,000 to 1,200 startups at any given time selling security. There's one person we all sell to, the Chief Information Security Officer. If you're that one person, how much can you absorb? You can't. And so we had to think differently, and we did. And we said, look, what's the problem? We're trying to do cloud security differently. Cloud is new. Nobody really understands the cloud. People don't even know why they should buy us over 10 other priorities in security. Let's make a lot of noise. Let's punch above our weight class. And we do that by building awareness that there's a security problem. So guess what? We started doing research. Our researchers found stuff like this that made news. We found that Tesla was already compromised in the cloud. We found that a lot of organizations using Google were exposing data. Well, next thing I know, I'm on CNBC Live talking about this. And all of a sudden, people are like, whoa, who are these guys? Right? And by the way, all of this, we had less than 12 million in funding. We didn't mention that yet. Between our seed and our Series A, we exited the company, where we did, with 12 million in funding. And everything I tell you was done that way. So good thing about being Indian is you learn how to be cheap. And you learn how to be frugal. And part of this is how do you do things in a frugal manner. I didn't spend on having the biggest booth at an event. I was okay being at the back. I found more leverage, and this was my leverage. So as a startup, the question is, how do you make every dollar feel like $100 spent, right? And this is what we did. And as soon as we did this, there was name recognition. Some bad falling out happened. Some people said, oh my God, like, hey, AWS, the execs are looking for you. You guys are making a lot of noise about cloud security. Well, of course, the cloud providers don't like it because I'm trying to say that you need security above and beyond what the cloud offers. But that's the risk you have to manage very, very carefully. You can't piss them off, but you have to have a fine line in saying, look, there's building awareness, and then there's saying things that are unethical. And all of these things, we had to follow very, very closely to make sure we were doing it within the law, within the ethics, within the responsible disclosure program of these companies to do it the right way. There are companies that have tried to do this, but do it the wrong way, where they end up in trouble more than anything else. You don't want lawsuits. Your 12 million can't get you through lawsuits, right? So, sort of, okay, we've got a name for ourselves. So the big question I spend a lot of time with companies I advise is, when do you start hiring people in sales? So let me tell you something. Anybody know who's the best salesperson in any startup? The founders. If you can't sell, nobody else can. Nobody else can help you. And so, look, some of us may be more technical, some of us may be more salesy. At the end of the day, at a startup, you're the janitor, you're the salesman, you're the HR officer, you're everything. And part of this is we have to figure it out, because if I don't know my selling motion, who do I know who to hire? The DNA of the salesperson. Do I hire somebody that's worked at Salesforce because I want some SaaS experience? Or do I hire somebody that's worked at Cisco in a very traditional experience? I don't know. I haven't found my repeatability in the sales process. And so unless you can do 10 to 20 of these where, you may not have closed 20 deals, but at least you're in conversations. Customers want to pilot your technology. They want to use it. I wouldn't start hiring salespeople. And when you do, then the second question you have to ask yourself is, are you hiring a sales leader or are you hiring a sales individual carrying a quota? That is where you have to play to your strengths and weaknesses. I was okay. I felt very confident that I could take the company to $10 million in revenue, myself being the de facto sales leader. Not everybody is, but there are other things I wasn't good at. I wasn't the best at marketing, so I hired, my first executive hire was a VP of marketing. But understand your strengths and weaknesses. And so the second advice I'll give you on sales is hire in twos. So I'll give you a real example in my company. I hired a person in the West, absolutely crushing it, blowing through his numbers. I hired a person in the East, couldn't get a deal done in a year. And I look back and say, the guy on the East kept telling me that the product market fit wasn't there. If I had just hired him, I would have listened to him, I would have believed him, and I would have pivoted my product and done things differently. But in reality, the problem wasn't with me, the problem was with him, right? And so a lot of times, look, sales is the most expensive sort of spend in any startup, right? The burn, their travel, their expenses, their all the other stuff you have to deal with, the commission checks. But I'll tell you, it's money well spent. And I think the important thing here is two aspects. Again, I'll summarize. One is hire in pairs, different regions, different DNA and background, and different mindset and thinking. That's one. And the second thing is really understand, are you hiring a leader or are you hiring an individual? Don't try to do both at the same time. It's hard to get right, okay? So this, by the way, is a picture of our first sales kickoff. So we Airbnb'd a house in Menlo Park and got all our team there, and that's where we did our sales kickoff. As you can see, there was no chef. Everybody was cooking their own meals on the grill. And in fact, one thing I forgot to tell you about the founding team is for my first 10 employees, when they would show up to work, they would have an IKEA box of their desk and an IKEA box of their chair. And the first thing they had to do is put those together. And if they couldn't, they probably weren't meant for being at a startup. Which leads me to people. So I started with this, and I'll sort of talk about some of the cultural aspects that were really important to me and learnings really from Cypher Cloud and things that I saw being done well and things that I think we could have done better in over time. Was ultimately people will make you successful. Nothing else matters, right? Everything else comes after your employees do. And so values, right? Values are something that are more than things you write on paper. Values are things you live by. Values are things you use to hire and ultimately decide if somebody fits into your organization or not, right? And I think those things are really, really important. And one of my key values was transparency. As I mentioned to you, these are people that trust you. They've come in because they have blind faith in you before you have product or revenue. And so the one thing, from a level of transparency, I shared my board decks with them. I shared board feedback with them. I shared financials with them, cash in the bank, burn rate, cap table. Because they're part of the system, they're part of the process. If they believe in you, they'll have higher degree of confidence and a higher intensity to execute and operate. It's very hard as founders to think about that and say, look, do I want to share that much? What if it leaks? What if this happens? What if that happens? And I think that was really, really important to me on the people side. The other thing was, and this isn't for everybody, but I was fortunate that I knew trusted people that I'd worked with in India to co-found Redlock, not only in US, but we at the same time started hiring engineering in India. But I will tell you, for companies that try to do it just for cost reasons, it's probably not worthwhile. If you don't have trusted people that you've worked with, if there isn't the skill set that you need for the product that you're developing, don't just do it for cost. The overhead of management, of the cross-pollination, ultimately becomes more costly. You could probably do a near-site facility somewhere here. We weren't very good at it. Some companies are phenomenal at running completely remote organizations. We actually acquired a company called Evident.io that was mostly remote engineering. If you can pull it off, that's fantastic. But we were very open. We wanted the best people. We were willing to hire them in India or in US. And by the time we got acquired, the company was about 80 people, and engineering was about 35, of which half were in India and half were here. But we never treated India as a second-class citizen. think a lot of times sort of you call it a development center. We used to call it as we have a dual HQ. We have India and we have here. And people in India felt they were at the same pedestal. They got equity. They came here. There was a rotation process. Myself and my co-founder and my leaders, every quarter one of us was in India. Those people were visiting here again. Cross-pollination of culture, ideas, values, and really not making it feel like they do work that is not that is subpar to the work that's done here. Okay. All right. So saving the best for last. What happened, right? We were hunky-dory. We're building this company. Things were going great. We sort of did, our first year of business, we did about $2.5 million in ARR. I'd, at this point, hired 8 salespeople in the field. I'd hired a VP of sales. Again, company was going really well. So a little history. In March of 2018, Palo Alto Networks acquired my biggest competitor, a company called Evident.io. And they talked to us. Evident.io had raised about $80 million in financing. They had about 250, 300 customers. Palo Alto Networks talked to us in March, and we had 15 customers going to 20. They said, look, you're too small. There's a proven company. They have a brand. They have all of this. We're going to take that path. We said our goodbyes, and off we went. That news broke out. Obviously, that means now the industry is getting real. People think, look, this is a real problem. It's a scalable problem. So we started getting a lot of inbound interest. And part of that, one of the ones that I spent a lot of time with there was Bessemer. Bessemer is a tier 1 venture firm, really sort of based in Redwood City, phenomenal team, phenomenal track record in security. And they came to us and said, look, we want to work with you guys. And I said, we don't need capital. By the way, started in September 2015. We're now in about May of 2018. Still got $5 million of my $12 million in the bank. So running a tight ship with 81 employees. Okay, so business was good. Revenues coming in. As I said, the Desi model, right? Trying to keep it sort of efficient, if you will. So they gave us a preemptive term sheet, and I said, look, there's a lot of activity spurring up in this market because Evident got acquired. Now the competitors of Palo Alto Networks want to know who else is out there and talking to us. I don't need capital right now. They said, no, look, what do we need to do to get your interest? And I liked them. Again, going back to the personality fit, team fit. So we said, look, we'll sign a term sheet. I'll get the money. So we got $25 million Series B signed, money wired. Bessemer the lead, Microsoft, Blackstone, and my existing investors. So money's already in my bank. But I had a very creative thing, which apparently they said this is the first time they've ever done in their 20-some years of VC funding. I had an out, which basically said if I got a letter of intent from a company wanting to acquire me within 90 days, I could return the capital to them with no equity dilution. I don't know how I came up with that idea. I was driving to the airport at an event in Florida, and the guy was really pushing me to take the money, and I just threw this idea, wild idea out there, and they agreed. And so I had this beautiful out. Now, I'm already sort of 2.5 months into that. At this point, I expect nothing else is happening. We're focused on building this awesome company that's scaling. I'm now at between March and this time in June, July, I'm at about 70 customers now. So we scaled pretty fast. And I get an email as I'm getting ready to go to Black Hat, which is a security conference in Vegas that happens annually, saying, hey, Palo Alto Networks, we've got a new CEO, and we're interested in meeting with you. We sort of get into this 3-hour meeting on a Friday afternoon. Tuesday's the deadline. So Friday afternoon, we have this meeting. Everybody goes home. Saturday afternoon, I'm hiking and barely have any service, and I get a text message saying, can you send your financials? We want to write you an LOI. 11 p.m. on Monday night, we signed the term sheet. And I sent an email to our investors, and they were completely shocked that, look, this was not happening. And in fact, we were sort of going to Palo Alto Networks. Now, I think the important thing is it's above capital, right? So if you think about where I was from a positioning standpoint, I had capital guaranteed. So we could continue to grow the company. But there's a couple of things that were really important, right? In a market like security, and I was just talking to somebody earlier, or any startup for that matter, 0 to $1 million is hard. Yes. Then sort of you get some repeatability, $1 million to $10 million, doable with perseverance. Getting from 10 million when you've crossing the chasm, for those of you that have read that book, is really, really hard. and takes a lot of capital. So my choices would have been, and history shows it for you that know startups, you can either go end up raising $100 million, take over a couple of rounds, and continue to build a large-scale distribution to get you out to market. Global distribution channels, sales being the most expensive, as I talked about. You could do that. But at the end of the day, what you have to look at is what is the outcome? And to me, outcome is two things. One, as entrepreneurs, we're all passionate about building something meaningful. So will you get to carry forward your vision wherever you go? Is there a company that's buying me to kill me? Or is a company buying me to make me 5x or 10x of what I can be on my own? So that was a very important piece I spent a lot of time understanding at Palo Alto Networks. And a result of that has been that we run an independent business unit at Palo Alto Networks. We were doing $2 million a quarter when we got acquired. 2 quarters from then, we publicly announced that we were on a $150 million run rate business, right? And so to me, the question was, do I have a good product, and can Palo Alto Networks fuel me to get to my end state of vision where every company using the cloud is using Redlock? So that was number one. The second thing for me, for both employees and founders, is what's gonna be the output? So if I had taken that round, the simple math was for us to make the same amount of money as individuals, employees and founders, the next day after the Tuesday, we would have to sell the company at $350 million based on the dilution and other aspects to make the same output to us. And so you have to think about how much risk is going to be involved, because there's a certain point of threshold in the business where people either initially value you on technology, right? When I'm selling for 173 million plus, doing 2 million a quarter, I'm not getting a revenue multiple. I'm getting a strategic multiple. You start getting to about $10 million a year, and now people are going to value you in a very different set of metrics. Those metrics are growth, multiple of your forward-looking, your next 12 months, and that's when stuff gets really, really tough. And so to me, to be able to get a strategic multiple, life-changing event for 82 people, and continue to do something meaningful was really, really important. And I think that was really what drove it. And out of all the companies that you think about in cybersecurity, Checkpoint, Juniper, and others, there is no other company I would rather be at than Palo Alto Networks, right? Just from an innovation standpoint, culture standpoint. So anyway, that is, as I say, my story. Hopefully that was valuable. Happy to take any questions and sort of dive deeper into any of these areas.
So let's give a big round of applause to him. Amazing story. I just didn't even flip, just listening. So that's awesome. Usually I try to get started with one question. But today I'm going to do it differently. We have Vijay here. Vijay was Varun's first manager, I guess. And so Vijay wanted to share some interesting stories. So I'm not sure what he's going to share. So Varun, forgive me in case he talks something really interesting. So Vijay, how about, would you like to share? You wanted to share some few fun stories about Varun.
So first, I think congrats to Varun, and again, great story, and a lot of lessons learned. I met Varun, of course, in 2006, and if I were to think about from a leadership and how do I define for Varun, there are 3 things, and he talked about 3 P's. I'll talk about 3 C's. It's character, competency. It's character, it's competency, and courage. So, I met him, of course, through the hiring process, and you're working through kind of some of the Fortune 100 companies. One of them being a large internet company not too far from here. And I was actually on vacation, or I came back, and we were starting a project as a team. And I come back at this client, and we're doing this work for the CISO. And here I am, and meeting this young kid, or young professional, and he comes up with brilliant kind of the ideas, and he's challenging the team. And I'm like, this guy is different. And I tell my colleague as well, who, by the way, we know both of us very well. I said, look out for this guy. He's going to do something different, and watch out for him. So So that was sort of the knack, as we think about from companies and our clients, we think about nurturing people and growing their careers. We definitely sort of saw like the character. He talked about transparency, so that's like his character. Competency, we threw him into a few different things, from financial services clients to tech companies, and he talked about Agile Alliance. We were working on the whole GRC. Agile Alliance was practically that time they were sort of getting conceived, very small, and GRC was not even a term that people understood. Varun sort of took it bull by the horn and said, okay, let's go figure this out and let's make a mark. So that was again competency from trying different stuff out of your comfort zone. And courage was for him to sort of really challenge. Whenever I had conversation with him and as a team, and we always encouraged like challenging each other. He wouldn't just take a kind of yes man or kind of the answer, and that's not what we expect. But then he really had the courage, and of course we see through his journey and through his kind of accomplishments what courage. So in my mind, I would say like some really interesting. It's kind of really proud to kind of see what he has accomplished as well as what he has done for the team and our customers. So definitely kudos to Varun and great to see him be here. Yeah.
Thank you for the mentorship you gave me.
Thank you, Vijay. All right, so we'll get started with questions. So please, who would like to start off with the first question?
So hi, Varun. That was a great talk. I'm going through some of those things right now in my mind as I'm doing my startup. And I have two questions. One is, in your early stage when you started the company, when you thought of having an advisor in the company? That is first. And the second thing is, so initially 15 or 20 customers, you said like it needs to be the founding team. Then after that, like how you started with like looking into the sales process and kicking off in that, because the initial thing is key, that how you build up that sales process.
Yeah, both great questions. So, as a first-time CEO and founder, one of the ways I thought I could build a lot of credibility is get a strong set of advisors around me. I'd say in some ways that was a mistake. I went for star power initially, and what happened is, you go to people who say, I'd love to have you as an advisor, but yeah, I'll take X points in the company or quarter point, half point, whatever you end up giving. And you're just so excited about this person coming on. You don't really spend a lot of time thinking through what is the value you expect out of them. And I'd say, in hindsight's 2020, I have some regrets about some of the people I gave equity to as advisors up front that did absolutely nothing after that. And so I would say, just like you're expecting from an employee certain deliverables, certain value in return for compensation, I think it's okay to understand from your advisor what value can they bring, and more importantly, sort of put them in buckets, right? As I said, as a founder CEO, you have certain strengths, and you have to sort of internalize what are your weaknesses. So for me, example being, as I mentioned, my strength wasn't on, building large sort of go-to-market, a machine on a marketing. So I found a phenomenal marketeer who had run marketing for Tanium, is now CMO of Tenable, who was my advisor. They're very valuable. I then hired an advisor to help me build a sales playbook that was an enterprise sales playbook when I was getting from 3 reps to 10, 15 reps to really understand how do you map territory planning, account planning, how do I do that? Those advisors were most valuable for me than the star power advisors that I got for the name and the brand that ultimately delivered little value to me. So I'd be mindful about understanding and slotting them into what areas of your weakness can they help you with, or what areas of help you need where they can slot in. The sales piece is always a bit art and a bit science. I think this is where, as a gut, as an instinct, as I mentioned, the best salesperson is you, the founder, ultimately. But if you find yourself doing 100% of sales, then you've hit capacity problems, right? And then you need help. And so part of it for me was, look, I have to spend a lot of time in other areas of the business as well. I should certainly be spending at least 50% of my time sales, customers, product market fit. But when it got to closer to 100%, I had a problem. I had a scalability problem. So that's when I decided it was time for me. Even though we had only closed 2 deals, but I had a pipeline of POCs going on and interest forming in at least 25 companies, and we had to pursue those, take those through the process, and I needed feet on the ground. And one thing we didn't talk about in the main presentation is really the field sales versus the field enterprise sales versus inside sales model. I think that is also part of the learning that you do in those 15, 20 conversations you're having. At what level are you having those conversations? Are you talking to developers? Are you talking to leaders? Is there a motion you can build? Because by far the cheapest and the most scalable motion you can build is if your product has viral adoption. If ground up people try it, love it, buy it, whether it's open source, freemium, but those are hard nuts to crack when nobody knows you. And so the field reach is important. And the last piece I'll mention on the field piece is what I talked about. How do you get scale and leverage? For me, I decided to go 100% channel from day one because I could only hire 2, 3, 4, 5 reps at a time. But I need 50. I'm competing with companies like Palo Alto Networks at that time that have 100, 200 reps. And so I needed a whole channel that I could leverage from a sales perspective. So again, each one is a little bit different, but I think the first 20 deals you work on yourself give you a good bit of color on how you want to take this forward.
Thanks for that. And one question, how you become advisor in the companies?
I think for me as well, I sort of look at the same personally. I look at what value am I going to get back? Is it a domain that I understand well? Is this their reach and customers and other capabilities that I can bring to the company? Because neither I have a time to do a lot of these advisor engagements, nor do I do justice to the company just taking on an advisory seat. So if I'm going to do 2 or 3 of these at most, it's really value to the company. Am I passionate about the space, and do I understand enough?
Thank you.
So how did you get your first 5 to 10 customers? Normally, you need to have a repeatable sales process before engaging with the channel. But you told us earlier, you started with a channel strategy initially.
So I think you're right. Channel strategy came once I hired the salespeople, but I didn't even hire the salespeople till I knew what a repeatable sales process would look like. I think the first 5, 10 customers usually will come through your network of people you know. It'll come through your investors that'll potentially make introductions. It'll come through some of the early, quote-unquote, marketing leverage you might have. But those are the hardest initial ones, I would say. And while the benefit of having a tier 1 investor is they'll have more of that access, there's obviously downsides I talked about from do you go for the brand or do you go for the person? But I would say for us, it was personally a combination of my relationships, a combination of their friends in the network of people I knew, second-degree connections, and investors. And the channel program came once I hired salespeople and I knew repeatability.
Any other question? Anyone else? Vikas.
So did you have any IP when you started? Did you file patents? Why is it that Palo Alto couldn't build what you were doing?
So it's an interesting thing. It kind of reminds me of 2 things I wanted to talk about. One is IP. The other is confidentiality. I'm in some ways, I have a very contrarian point of view. A lot of startups, people will say, you ask somebody, just elevator conversation. Oh, what do you do? I'm working on a startup. Oh, what's a startup? I can't talk about it, it's stealth. I had a different opinion on that. I felt like if I couldn't talk to everybody about what I did, and without the fear of somebody copying me because I told you in 30 seconds what I do, that would say there's a defensibility problem in what I'm building. And so I never asked for NDAs to tell people what I do, number one. Related to that, we did file patents, but they were sort of more in, at least 12, 16 months after we started really building product because we wanted to file meaty patents, if you will. That came a little bit later, certainly not when we were raising seed round. We hadn't written a single line of code when we raised our first dollars into the company. But yeah, I'd say patents were part of it, but quite frankly, it was execution. It was brand. The brand I talked about, the guerrilla stunts we ran, the technology that was beating competition, beating Palo Alto Networks in the field. The thing with large companies is there's an element of inertia. To try to get moving takes time. When there's a market that's as fast moving as the cloud and you have somebody that is executing in a direction that you want to take it, you want to jump on that, right? And this is why we were able to go from the 2 million a quarter to sort of 30, 35 million a quarter in 2 quarters because the product was there and it was really about the distribution scale.
Hey, my name is Raji, and I'm a director of products at TIPCO. So you made a comment about how in startups you went through, in your startup in particular, you went through a few iterations around product market fit. Can you elaborate how that changed? I presume the product itself didn't change, but you probably went and explored different markets, perhaps. So maybe a little bit about that.
Yeah, great question. So I think my product market fit experience I was talking about was more from my earlier company, CipherCloud. I think what we experienced there was right out of the gate, 25, 30 customers, 50 customers loved what we did. But because we were early, there was a lot of dynamics and moving parts. One of those was that cloud providers that we were building security for didn't like our architecture of how we were inserting ourselves into the traffic path. And they decided to do two things. One, tell customers that they didn't recommend that architecture, which just made it difficult for customers to go decide to buy it anyway if the cloud provider is saying, no, we don't think this architecture is right. The other was cloud providers themselves, from a competitive landscape perspective, were trying to build those capabilities themselves. And so when I say, don't sort of rest your laurels once you've found the first 10 or 20 customers, it's really every 25 customers revalidate product market fit. Go back and really analyze with your team, like what worked, what was the use cases I sold for, what are people paying for, what was the competitive landscape. And I'll tell you, in our 3-year journey, it changed. At some point, our customers would say our biggest competitor is the cloud provider. Then they would say, oh, biggest competitor is Splunk. Then they'd say, no, wait a minute, I think it's Cisco. And it kept evolving. And obviously as a startup, you've got to just be nimble and be on your 8 ball in terms of how you're trying to validate what customers are buying you for.
Next question.
Yes. You mentioned that you talked to 24 investors before you found the right fit in the 25th. From that experience and journey, is there any learnings you came up with in terms of what's a good sequence in talking to investors, and how would you make it more efficient?
Yeah, definitely. I would build a target list of investors you really care about and start with the investors you care about the least first. It's a learning, right? You're sort of practicing. You're going to evolve. They're going to ask you hard questions you weren't prepared for. You want to really evolve your pitch. I would say I probably in the 24 meetings probably had at least 18 different versions of my deck, my pitch deck that evolved. But by the end of it, we tried this. So yes, one, to answer your question, start with the ones you least care about first and make your way up. I would say depending on the round you want to raise, also target not just by brand, but the fund size. So, a large company, nothing against Sequoia or Andreessen, but if you have $1 billion fund and you're going to ask for a $2 million check, guess how much time they're going to spend with you, even if they decided to fund you? They simply don't have the cycles to invest in you. If you got $2 million out of a $50 or $100 million fund, they're likely to spend much more time and effort in helping you, right? I think so. Part of this is the investors that want to sprinkle checks out and really it's sort of the gamble, and one of those 20 pays off, works for them. It's a blockbuster. To me, I didn't want those up front. I needed folks that would meaningfully spend time in the company. And one of the tactics I used that I think worked is this, it's very interesting. They'll all say, keep me posted about your fundraising, but they're all waiting to see who's the first one to write your term sheet. And so one of the plays I made was, we had 3 or 4 design partner customers that we were working with. And so I sent an email to like the 20 investors I was talking to, different flavors, and I said, we're having a call. I'm going to get one of my customers. I'm going to have a conference call where I've invited all the investors who are interested to come hear from the customer why they think what we're doing is interesting. And I sort of almost created this competitive demand where on the call, they were all asking questions so they could hear other investors. They weren't quite sure who it was or the backgrounds, but they knew there was demand, there was interest, people are inquiring. So I think that sort of was another tactic I used, which is unconventional, and I did a few unconventional things, as you can see in this process, that worked pretty well.
I think that was a great one.
Hi, this is...
Sorry. I just wanted to follow with the question that he was just answering. Is that okay? So when you, great talk, thank you so much. So I'm also a founder, and I'm in the process of just getting started to raise funds. And the question is that when I start looking and making a list of all the investors, there are some people that I really want to target and meet with and connect with because I think they're amazing people and they are in line with what I'm thinking and working on. But I don't find any connections that I have of my personal contacts that I can reach out to them. What would you suggest as reaching out blank to those type of people, or?
You know, if you remember, I compared them to analysts, right? There are those that want to hear about everything. They don't want to miss out on something. And so the chances of them responding to even on a cold email are pretty high, actually, surprisingly high. So I wouldn't be shy. I would try to get some context, read their blogs. A lot of the VCs are blogging, tweeting, see if there's a connection, especially if they know that you're following them or reading something or found some interesting theme that connects to what you're working on. Your chances of a response are pretty high. But even without that, generally, they want to hear from most people.
Hi, Varun. My name is Preeti. I run marketing for a startup. My question is about the team. You talked about transparency being one of your values. Turning that around, what were some of the values and qualities you looked for when you hired your team? And now that you are in a big ocean, how are you maintaining those values and culture?
Great question. I think for us, there's a few things, right? Transparency was one, sort of more of the company giving. I think as a startup, there's a lot of top people talk about the fail fast mentality, but that's sort of kind of important, right? If you're going to just be planning forever, not iterating through the process of building, developing products, releasing products, that becomes a problem. The second thing for us was really manic customer focus. Like, it's really not about what I think is right, my CTO thinks is right. At the end of the day, we're working towards customer success. And I'll tell you, you have to do what it takes to make your first 10 customers successful, because those first 10 will get you the next 100. And so I think part of this is really that customer focus that engineers need to have, right? Some of the DNA of these engineers are, look, I'm right, and anybody else on the call telling me is wrong. And I think if you're not the humble pie listening to your customer, and customer's always right, understanding that mentality becomes a problem, especially in the early stages. So, those were a couple of things that we looked at. I think diversity of background and ideas was certainly another one. So we had super smart people, 20 plus years of experience, but I hired people from programs like I forget what some of those accelerator programs in the city they run for front end, for React. People go from school, go there for 6 months, just immersive programs. Some of my best engineers today are people that came from that background, and we gave a chance to. So a lot of it thinking was, don't hire people that, if I looked at myself in the mirror, I'd say people that think like me. I don't want everybody thinking like me. I don't want everybody that executes like me, looks like me, and has the same background. Because if they do, then there's no diversity of thoughts and ideas. I'd say as you go into a startup to a public company, things change. I wish I could say that all of those same values have sort of continued with us 1 year later. This week is 1 year to our acquisition, so time's flown by. But things change, and I think we all, as a startup, the one thing that's constant is change. And that change continues even in our world today.
Hi. Great talk. I would like to have, I want to know a few things. What are the advice you are giving to new cybersecurity startups? And how has the ecosystem changed since when you started and now?
The ecosystem gets bigger and noisier. I think my advice specifically to a cybersecurity startup will be no different than everything I talked about, right? How do you break through the noise? How do you appear larger than life? How do you remain frugal and not be inefficient on capital? Because in cybersecurity, sometimes you're stuck in the product market fit and evolving through 2, 3, 4 iterations, because you may have found the hardest security problem to solve, but just because it's so damn hard, your customers don't even understand it, and that's not a priority for them. And so you have to be nimble, and I think I have come to realize in cybersecurity, it's not about solving the hardest problem, it's solving the problem that the customer has today and is going to have in the next 12 to 24 months. Because I've seen companies fail that had the best tech, the best engineers, but they built something so complex that's so hard to deploy that, think about a CISO organization. Generally, they have a backlog of about 6 months to even be in the queue to do a POC. So with my product, with Redlock, it was a turnkey, API-driven SaaS service, just runs. You don't have to deploy anything. You don't have to configure anything in your network, no endpoint agents. And so the easier you can make it to prove time to value, the better you're going to be. Because for somebody who doesn't know you, doesn't care about you, For them to spend 3 months to do a POC with you, it's not going to cut it. And I know enough cybersecurity startups that have failed trying to solve the hardest problems, most complex problems, but being too heavyweight to demonstrate value.
Hey Varun, this is Aditya. First, I want to say fight on. I did my business school at USC.
Fight on.
So currently I'm at Confluent doing product marketing, but before that I was at App Dynamics. So we faced integration issues post the merger, like at the organization. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on how are you dealing with that at Palo Alto Networks? And also just curious, again, if you can share, is in terms of within the contract which you signed, like is there like safeguards or like what are you doing to ensure that the acquisition is successful and you truly remain independent moving forward?
Yeah, great question. So we had to deal with fewer integration challenges than a traditional startup because we were just given full autonomy. Part of the whole discussion and debate we have on how to scale this thing is it was a very pragmatic thinking that Palo Alto Networks bought is typically when companies are acquired, the acquirer wants to shape you in the way they think. They want you to adopt their engineering practices, their release processes, their sales practices. And Nikesh, our CEO for Palo Alto Networks, said, look, if we did that, then we're taking everything you know that you're good at and taking you and making you look like us. That's not what we're buying you. And so part of this is actually we have brought practices that Palo Alto Networks never had as a hardware firewall company that are unique to them that they've embraced very well. So we've got a level of autonomy. We've never changed our engineering practices to evolve to Palo Alto. We've changed them because we've gone from 80 people to 500 people in 1 year. So we've changed them for scale, but not for Palo Alto Networks. That being said, there are always things as a public company, financial reporting, sales, compensation, that you have to integrate, but we've kept it as low touch as potentially even possible. In terms of sort of retention and how do we keep growing? Look, I'm a believer there's companies out there that will pay your employees more than what you might do with even golden handcuffs for the right people. And so I think compensation alone is important, but won't hold your people back. So I think part of this is really the culture of moving fast, the scale of the business. People who've built this from the ground up are now seeing this vision turn into reality at the scale we're doing it. I think that excites people the most. Compensation is a icing on the cake, and we have structure in place where a big part of the deal structure was also in stock that vests over a few years, as would be typical of employees joining a company. So there's definitely those guardrails, but if that was the only thing, it wouldn't have worked.
Next. Anyone? Okay, let me ask. Okay, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Varun. Great sharing your story. So as you grew your company and you said you are the hustler and the best sales in the company, so at what point, then you hired the VP of marketing and sales guys, and you said you could have managed 10 million by yourself. Was there a couple, incidents that where you let your sales guys take over the sales and they make mistake? And then how do you, get yourself involved and manage the situation?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's really hard as a founder is letting go of aspects of the business, but one thing that has to be done. You will never scale, I think, physically. I think it's just not good for you to keep doing everything yourself and having the burden mentally and emotionally of doing everything. So I was fortunately good at giving up. So one of the things my team will tell you is when somebody came in, a leader came in, I let them be the player and I was sort of there for coaching. I think it's bound to happen that when you bring new employees and you scale as fast as you do, mistakes will be made. And you're just there on using it as a coaching moment, not reprimanding them for that, because you've got to let them learn through the process, right? So I definitely did back down as soon as I hired the sales team. But as soon as I hired the sales reps, I became the SE. When I hired the SE, then I sort of backed down from that as well. But that being said, look, customers want to hear from the founders, right? Your early customers are buying into your vision again. And so you're always there right by your sales organization, sales team. But we as founders have to learn how to let go, because you're not going to be able to hire the best people if you're going to micromanage them just because it's your idea. It has to be as much their idea as yours.
Thank you.
Excellent story. Very, very inspiring. One thing I wanted to share that I come across and meet investors, and most of them are money managers. They are not entrepreneurs who have built companies and experience. Or if they have done, they are not good at articulating or expressing or not good at expressing things. I see you have amazing experience, as well as you are so good at articulating. Do you see yourself being a VC eventually, or how do you see going forward as a thing?
Yeah, because I'm still going to be at Palo Alto Networks for quite some time, at least for the foreseeable future. I don't plan to leave. I'm just really learning a lot here. And I think part of what I was explaining to some people before this is, as a startup, your dream is to go build a $100 million run rate business. And then people say, oh, you can go public. You're at that scale. Here, sort of my starting point, first year milestone was to hit 100 million. That's sort of table stakes. And we've announced publicly that we want our next gen sort of cloud security business will be $1 billion business in the next 4 years. So to me, I'm just loving learning about that scale. I do think about, like, would I be a long-time public company executive, or do I want to be a investor? I don't think I'm quite ready for being an investor yet. We'll see though. You never know where life takes you. That being said, a lot of investors are now coming out with more similar backgrounds than mine, that were operators, successful entrepreneurs, executives turning into investing. And I think the funds that are doing that are probably going to see the most success, because entrepreneurs want to work and learn from fellow entrepreneurs, not money managers and financial experts. So I think we'll see more of that.
Hi, thanks very much for sharing your story in an authentic way. I think it's very powerful, the way you shared your story today. My question is about people and culture. You talked about, I'm deep, by the way. So you talked about how you created people, a culture, and it was focused on transparency. What are some of the things that you looked for in terms of qualities in the other people that you hired in these first 80 key people? What are some of the traits that you were smelling for in terms of, as you built the team out here in India?
Yeah, I think that might be similar, overlapping to things I talked about. I may give you a different spin on it, which still answers your question, which is sort of, there were employees that worked and were successful. There were people we fired within 2 months, 3 months, and they just weren't cut out for it. It certainly helped that some of the early people had worked at startups at some point in their career. I think there's a level of appreciation on speed, I keep going back to hustle, just the way, the sense of urgency you need to execute with, that if somebody's been at a startup at some point in their career, certainly helps. So I think that was one. The other thing that really helped was, you really don't want personality clashes. So one thing we looked for, absolutely, that was a no-go. You just couldn't be a brilliant jerk, right? And so we really looked for people that were humble, that didn't bring a lot of their ego into the office and the organization, thinking they're the know-it-alls. I think those were a couple of things that worked really well for us. And I think the one thing that we gave employees, especially with our multi-center between India and US, we gave employees back a lot of flexibility. So one of my things my employees will tell you, in fact, they tell me now they feel like they work harder at Palo Alto Networks now than they did at Redlock. So clearly I didn't make them work hard enough. But more importantly, we gave them flexibility. In return for being a startup, we had a culture saying, look, I'm not telling you to come in at 8 or leave at 7 or have dinner here. We had core working hours, so 10 to 4, you had to be in the office. If you like to come in at 8 and leave by 4, you like to come in at 10, leave by 6, whatever you want, especially with Bay Area getting as crazy as it is. We had some core working hours, everybody collaborated, but we gave people a lot of flexibility, which went a long way. And in return, people put a lot of time on their own, not mandated by the company.
I had one more follow-up question on that. So how do you smell those personality clashes and brilliant jerks beforehand? That's what I'm finding it very hard.
I wish I had a 100% success rate for you. I mean, this is why I said we fired a number of people fast. I mean, the most you can do is reference checks. We didn't rely on any references they gave us. We always did blind reference checks. It's hard sometimes when people are 3 degrees separated. But we really, really focused on blind reference checks. Talking to old bosses. One thing I would always ask the employees, I wouldn't ask them to say, give me your 3 references. If I couldn't find anybody, I'd say, I want to talk to your old boss or your current boss if they know you're leaving. Can you make an intro? So, I find when you give employees the choice of picking their own references, you know what you're going to hear back. So there's no point wasting your time calling down those references. that, and then you make mistakes, and you just have to have a culture of letting those people go quickly.
So I'm just curious, Preeti, how did you know that he smells the right people? His sensing capability. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Okay, so let me ask a question before someone else is ready. So what do you think for the aspiring entrepreneurs? That's okay. Hopefully you guys can hear me. So for next 3 years, the way the cybersecurity landscape is changing, there are almost, like you said, 1,000. I've heard numbers like even 3,000 startups. So for the new ones who want to start off, start another cybersecurity company or security related. So what would be your advice to them from a market opportunity, or what to look out for, or what they should focus on? Let's say if you had to start today. Nikkei said, hey, Varun, we're done, you got all the money, everything, whatever. Why don't you start a new one and we'll get you back in again?
Yeah, a couple of things I've learned, like two things. One, it's all about developers. I think we're moving in a transition stage where the CISO and selling to the CISO, it's hard. CISOs are overwhelmed. They're still thinking very traditionally in terms of security. It's the DevOps teams and the developers, sort of the motion that you've seen companies like GitLab and others, GitHub and HashiCorp run, are all bottoms-up sales process. They're building things that are very powerful, improve developer productivity. Security being the same way. I think security now has to be frictionless, has to be integrated into the CI/CD processes wherever, whether you're building application security, network security, doesn't matter, right? You have to instrument in the right way, but it has to be seamless. I think, as I mentioned the point earlier, don't build the hardest, most complex technology that'll take a customer 6 months to understand how to use. Deliver value fast. So I think a lot of startups are starting to understand customer experience, user experience. 7 years ago, 5 years ago, you didn't think a lot about user experience in security products. I think that's huge now. Ultimately, I would push folks to think about, while everybody wants to build a single pane of glass in cloud security, notice what's happening. People talk about platforms. Every startup wants to build a platform, but customers are still buying best of breed in each category. So rather than trying to do too many things too soon, pick one thing that you know really well and really sort of do the best in that one category before you try to become a platform on day one. So I think the trend of, contrary to popular belief, everybody wants a single pane of glass, that pipe dream doesn't exist. So go solve a real meaningful problem for developers, DevOps teams, and go deep in whatever you do.
So just to follow up on the DevOps thing, I mean, there are also a number of startups which have been funded, right, in DevOps security for the last almost, I would say, 18 months or 2 years I've been noticing. So there again, it seems like if anyone had to start, again, it's kind of a crowded field, right? So is there anything else do you see? I mean, just trying to extend your
I talk to people a lot about this, actually. It's not always about doing something net new. I honestly think doing something noticeably and measurably better and not necessarily new is also a very good business. In fact, I will tell you, I spent last week in India, and all the startups there, the brilliance around that is they're not doing things that are net new that nobody in the world's thought about. They're implementing things, localizing things better than anybody else can. And I strongly believe in startups, it's going to be very rare today in security for you to do something that nobody else has thought about. So assume somebody else is already doing what you're doing. So one part of it is the product. The other is the team behind the product. So as much as product market fit is important, so is founder market fit. So do you have credibility in the space you're tackling that you can either raise money on or you can reach the audiences that you're trying to sell to? And really sort of, those are important aspects of building products. So I've given up on thinking that I'll be able to think about something net new in security that nobody's thought about. In fact, Redlock started 3 years after Evident did and 5 years after Dome9 did. And we just felt we could do it better, faster, cheaper for our customers.
Well, there is an example was last month itself we had Demisto, Slavic came, they started later than Phantom Cyber. Even though, by the way, we'll have Phantom Cyber CTO also coming and founder speaking next month. So I'm having the cybersecurity
Season
fest
of security.
this year,
Yes.
every month for my story. So those, please register for that also. So anyway, it looks like Rajiv, you have a question?
Yeah, just a follow-up on what you just said. With the approach you just said in cybersecurity, does that lead to companies only leading towards M&A rather than IPO? Because you're being focused, you're not going broad, which is what one would need.
So I think most companies, even the ones that have eventually gone public, started with one thing, right? If you look at Uber, Uber started with Uber Black, and that was all that they did. And now Uber does 17 other things, right? And so I think in security too, I'm not saying ultimately you won't do more. Like even at Palo Alto Networks now with the muscle we have and the acquisitions we're making, we're integrating more. But I will tell you, my biggest fear is still the next startup that is as hungry as Redlock was 3 years ago, that does the one thing really, really well, while I'm trying to build this consolidated platform that may be good enough, but not the best. And so I think it starts with getting one thing right, proving a customer base, and then continue to do more things on it. I mean, look at HashiCorp. It's just classic playbook of targeting the developers, starting with this whole notion of Terraform. Everybody's adopted Terraform as the de facto standard of building cloud environments. And now they've added security into that. They've added other commercial offerings. And I know companies that are doing $10 million deals with HashiCorp, the platform, right? But that's not how they started.
Yeah, I think I also like the idea what you suggested to the audience earlier was from the product market fit, keep reviewing it after, like you said, 10, 15 customers or every year or kind of, so don't just get complacent, I suppose. Sorry, yeah.
So what was different in Palo Alto Networks where they are able to take the product from $8 million run rate to $150 million? Is it at their channel or number of salespeople or compression in the sales cycle?
No, quite frankly, it was just even simpler than that. It was two things. One was leave us alone. Two was fuel us, give us more capital. As I mentioned, we've gone from 80 people to 500 in 1 year. And part of it is a recognition that while they have access to 65,000 customers, their sellers don't know how to sell cloud products. And so we actually have 100 reps selling just the Redlock product today in the field. And so part of this is investment, which is over-investment in certain areas to say, look, we have this concept with Nikesh devised, which is speedboat. So if you think about it, our next-gen firewall is this massive yacht sailing in the middle of the ocean. Now you're still sitting on the shore. You need to catch up to that business, get on the yacht, and then sort of consolidate and move forward. So the idea of our business is we're a speedboat. We are funded in a manner where I have my own sales, marketing, engineering, customer success, all operating as a startup. And we're moving fast. We're catching up. At a certain point, we'll hit mass scale where the traditional sellers of Palo Alto Networks, the 900 salespeople that we have, who we ultimately want selling this, will see that more and more of our business is shifting there. They'll start understanding how to position these products, learn from this specialist organization, and over time, these things will merge when it becomes mainstream. So I think it's really even simpler than, you just can't have a traditional mindset on this from an acquisition standpoint. And I think that's what Palo Alto did right.
Hi, Varun. Thank you. Hi. Thank you for sharing the inflection points in your career. The images approach is really great. So you mentioned that the problem or one of the problems of big companies is the inertia. Now you're part of a big company. How do you prevent that inertia creeping into what you do now?
Great question. So I fight that inertia every single day. I think part of this is I belong to a big company. I have a badge. I have a system of a big company. Yet I'm trying to get these 500 people to be motivated to act like a startup. So part of this is the DNA of folks we're hiring is still very startup-y. So we still continue to hire people with that background. The other thing, frankly, it's my job is sort of to move and remove any inertia that comes in our way. And a lot of times when we have those trade-offs, Nikesh really sort of his job, and he's positioned himself, and I meet with him on a weekly basis to tell him where we're seeing friction that he removes, right? So he's the bulldozer standing right in front of us, which is amazing. You have the CEO of this company standing as a bulldozer in front of you. If he finds that there are blockers that, the old ways are trying to block us, he removes them. My job is to make sure things don't escalate that far. And how do we work? And the first 6 months was a cultural transformation for the company because the company wasn't used to the speedboat. And so, yes, by design, I bulldozed into some areas where, potentially I upset some people, but that was by design. Like we had to nudge and kick people to say, look, things are going to be different in the way we operate. And I think the organization now is accustomed to it. Now we have 3 speedboats at Palo Alto Networks. We were the first one, but in the year we now have 2 others.
Thank you. Any last question? Please.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, when you have an idea and you want to approach VCs for that, do you really need to have some, some working code or something like that? Or how important is that, or how much does that help? And second question is about location. If you have an idea, so let's say if you are in Bay Area or you are in India, what's the difference, or how much that matter? Thank you.
So good questions. I think on the first one, I would say 9 times out of 10, you do need some level of at least a proof of concept available there. I think I lucked out that I'd been doing cloud security at that point for 9 years, 4 years at Salesforce, 5 years at Cypher Cloud. I'd built some network, some credibility in the market to be able to do that, and yet I had 24 rejections. So it's still hard. And so I would say yes, for a first-time entrepreneur, it's definitely necessary to have something to at least conceptually show, and not just something to show, but something that you have at least some design partners around. So friendly customers, other folks that can stand behind and say, yeah, look, this thing that you're working on, if you get it to this point, I'd be willing to write a check and buy the product, right? Or do a paid pilot or something. So yes, I think that's the answer there. In terms of location, I think 5 years ago probably would have mattered. Today, I feel like almost every investment fund in the US of noticeable size now has presence in India. I will say, though, a lot of them seem to be very B2C focused in India. So I'm not sure how much cybersecurity knowledge and appreciation there is. Israel, on the other hand, has a lot of that just by nature. So that might be an unknown. I'm not sure how India would go for a cybersecurity startup.
And also, I would say, just remember what Varun said in the beginning, one of his beginning slides, remember 3 Ps, right? Patience, perseverance, and persistence as an entrepreneur, I think, if you want to succeed, I guess. So with that, so we would like to close. We'll be here, Varun will be here for a few minutes until our Thai team throws us out. So let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you.